would like to welcome everyone to the review of the Peaceful Holiness Church Sunday School lesson for March 29th, 2020. We're still in Unit 1, which talks about the philosophies of Daniel. Today's study will be lesson number 5, the vision of the ram and the goat. The study text is going to be from Daniel, the 8th chapter, the 1st through the 27th verse. When we begin to study in the Old Testament, a lot of things, even in the prophetic realm, deal with the history. So it's not that we have to embellish it very much. We basically just have to tell the story like the story is written. So we hope and pray that you will be able to look at this story and this vision and begin to see how accurate the Bible truly is in its facts and its truths. And hope this study will help you find confidence and peace in this chaotic time that we're experiencing in the world. But when you go back and you begin to study this lesson, try not to get overwhelmed by the visions and the different beasts that it talks about and the things that are to happen. But allow yourself to be amazed and encouraged by Daniel's vision. Then apply that truth of the study to your life and to your commitment to live for God in the way that shows that you truly believe that Christ will truly return soon. This particular lesson has been broken down into 3 parts. Part number 1 is Daniel's vision at Susa. And in that vision, it talks about a ram and a goat. And the ram represented the empire that would come after the Babylonian Empire, which was called the Medo and Persian Empire. And they were very, very strong, and they ruled over the land after the Babylonians ruled for such a long time. And they were very powerful, and nothing could come up against them. But then all of a sudden in Daniel's vision, he saw a goat that was traveling from the west at such a speed and such a rate that its feet never even touched the ground. And it had one major horn that sat in between its eyes. And he was able to come up against the ram. And that particular empire was the Greek Empire. And it was ruled by Alexander the Great. And it was represented by the goat in Daniel's vision. And the goat was mighty and furious, and he had a ferocious skill of attack. So it attacked the ram that nobody else could ever even attack at that time. And he smote the ram, and he struck the ram down, and he stomped the ram underneath his feet. And then he became the supreme, superior ruler of this area of the world for a certain amount of time. During that time, Alexander the Great himself died at a young age. It was about age 32. So when he died, because in Daniel's vision he saw that the main horn, which was represented by Alexander, fell off. And out of that space grew 4 different horns, which were representation of the 4 main generals in Alexander's army who began to rule over the land and over Greece at that time. So the story in the vision begins to move forward through that, and it talked about how out of those 4 horns grew a very, very small horn, which would begin to also take over rulership of the provinces and the states and the countries and all the other kingdoms that were part of that area at that time. And most of that information is found in Daniel chapter 8, verse 9. And the person that began to move forward out of that little horn, his name was Antiochus IV of Epiphanes. He ruled the Seleucid Empire. And the Seleucid Empire inflicted horrible persecutions upon God's people. They also threatened and treated God's temples with desecration. That means that they violently disrespected God's house by worshiping their pagan gods in God's house. So because of all the persecution and because of all the despair, a lot of God's children at that time were led astray. And this was Antiochus' plan, to force God's people to worship Greek pagan gods. So these are the things that were a part of Daniel's vision in section 1 of the lesson. But of course, God is always a provider, and he's one who always creates a way for us to get an understanding of what is going on in our lives. That's why we're so appreciative of his word, which is the Bible, that allows us to be able to go back and study this history right now. So in section 2, which the text is taken primarily from chapter 8 of Daniel, verses 15 through 19, God provides an interpreter for Daniel. That was something really special, because at the time Daniel was the prophet, and he was the main one who was doing all of the interpreting. So who is it that could possibly come forth to be an interpreter for the one who normally has always been doing the interpreting? And at this time in Daniel's vision, he was quite confused. But God is not a God of confusion. And God always provides, which section 2 says God provides an interpreter. So God provided Daniel with a great interpreter. He provided Daniel the angel Gabriel. The messenger from God was provided to Daniel. Gabriel explained to Daniel, even before he interpreted the vision, that the vision was for the future, and it represented God's judgment concerning his people because of their sinfulness. And when we study other parts of the Bible and we reference other things, in James, the 4th chapter and the 17th verse, it talks about how when we know to do good, no matter what the situation is, whether that be persecution or whether it even be what we're going through now in our world today with different diseases and viruses trying to overtake us, when we know to do good and we still don't do it, that is a sin. And at times God has to remind us of who's in control, and that we can and we must always trust him. So just like Daniel listened to the angel Gabriel, and which was the messenger of God, we have to also continue to practice the art of being still, even in the midst of chaos and fear, and listen for the messages from God, and not through our carnal senses of just what our flesh experiences, but through our spiritual senses. We have to deny our flesh and move into our spirit so we can truly hear what God is trying to say to us. So we move forward into section 3. In section 3, most of the text is taken from Daniel, the 8th chapter, the 20th through the 27th verse. And in this particular section, it talks about, now after Gabriel, the messenger of God, explains to Daniel that his vision represented the future, then he moved forward into interpreting what the vision meant. Primarily, he talked once again about what we talked a little bit in section number 1, where he talked about the description of the ram and who it represented, the description of the goat and who it represented, and the understanding of each horn, the one main horn on the goat, and then the 4 horns that came out of the place when that main horn fell off. And then this is what I really want to touch on in section 3, was that small little horn that rose up out of between the 4 horns on the goat. And that particular horn represented a very, very extremely evil man. And let me go back. Antiochus the fourth of Epiphanes, which was a Seleucid who represented the Seleucid Empire. And like we said earlier, he ruled with such an iron fist and such persecution. And he wanted to rise so far and so high that he even challenged God himself. And he challenged, to try to bring us down. And when we think about this history lesson, sometimes we can apply this history lesson to our lives of where we are here now in the future, way, 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 way far in the future from this historic moment. And let me get his name right. Antiochus could also be representation of a challenge that we will have to face sometime in our future by the Antichrist himself, who will, during the times of tribulation, try to bring such persecution on us as saints. So that's the value of this particular Sunday school lesson, is a historic moment of information provided to us. Thank God that we have his word of God. Like when we were kids and we were growing up, once I became an adult, I would say to myself, and I've heard other people say it too, if I only knew then what I know now, I would have done things differently. That's what the Word of God and his Sunday school lesson here provides for us, is the opportunity to know now so that we can make a decision to be prepared when these particular challenges present themselves to us, like they're starting and beginning to present themselves to us now in our world that we're living in. So, because the lesson is so rich and it's so full and it has such in-depth information in it, once again, I want to share with you not to get too overwhelmed by everything that you will read in this vision, but begin to be amazed and appreciate just how wonderful and amazing God is to provide us this information, and also let us know that through him and trust in him that he will, no matter what comes against us, he is all sovereign and he is all powerful, and he will bring everything down because he will return. So I encourage you to go back into this lesson and to study it and really appreciate it and really enjoy it. And always remember that God did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. That concludes the review of Unit 1 lesson of the philosophies of Daniel, lesson number 5, the vision of the ram and the goat.